So I've loaded up my Foliage template blend file, and the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I'm saving this as something else. And then we can go ahead and add our image to our background. If you don't have it selected by default, if this is nested down like so, you can come over here to collections where it says reference atlas, expand this, make sure you click on background reference, and down here this may show as this kind of 3 lines. It might show as kind of an image icon that looks more like this, but either way we want to click on that. If we hover over, it says object data properties, and I'm going to click open next to this image. We want to make sure it's that image, click open, and navigate to your textures where you're keeping your atlases. Okay, and here's my alpha mask that I've prepared in Photoshop. Again, this is pulling from a Quixel Megascans texture, but this could of course be from your own process of scanning and editing in Photoshop. Okay, and now I'm going to turn on my components collection, and we're going to click on the word component, make sure we have this kind of subtle box around that bin-shaped object icon. And now we're going to talk about drawing. There's going to be a couple different ways I want us to draw, and we want to make sure we have one add-on turned on, which I did recommend in our add-ons video. So I'm going to go to Edit Preferences, and we're going to go to Extra Objects, Add Mesh. Okay, we want to make sure we have this on. So what it's going to allow us to do is if I hit Shift-A, go down to Mesh, we're going to see I can now insert a single vertex at a time. And that might be one workflow we want to use. First one I'm going to show you is just by starting off with raw planes and modifying those, extruding them, subdividing them, wiggling them around. So I'm going to start with that plane workflow. I'm going to come down here and just start with a plane. And now I'm going to tab into edit mode. Okay. You can also click on object mode and go to edit mode, but remember we can also hit tab on the keyboard. Okay, now I'm in edit mode, and I want to change my viewport shading to wireframe. Okay, I'm going to hit G on the keyboard, or you can use the gizmo. And I'm going to come over here and I want to kind of isolate around this bone shape. I'm going to zoom in with the mouse wheel. Okay, we can again use the gizmo to scale this down, but I want to make this box just kind of big enough to go around this first joint on this bone. Okay, by default you might have different things selected up here where next to edit mode we've got our vertex selection, edge selection, and face selection. We want to use edge select at this moment. And we can already see it's difficult to see the plane that we just drew because our background image is so opaque. So before we move on, let's go up to background reference. And we might have to get out of edit mode. So back to object mode. Our background reference, click. And I'm going to drag this opacity down so it's much, much fainter. So now we can see clearly our mesh. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go back into edit mode. And we have edge select mode on. You can see through the gizmo, I do have that selected. I'm actually going to turn off that gizmo right now. Okay, we can see that selected. And what I'm going to do is hit E on the keyboard. And what E does, instead of moving a line, it's going to extrude that edge. So if I go back, okay, if I just hit G, I'm moving the line. But E is going to add a new line and also create 2 parallel lines to it. So I'm going to do this a few times. I'm going to walk down, and I'm also going to scale as I go. So hitting S on the keyboard, moving this up, hitting E. I'm going to try to keep these square-ish as I move down. Scaling as I need. Okay, you can reposition these. I'm going to double tap G. Bring that up. Okay, now that's a pretty simplified shape. It's going to probably get us the cutout we want, but we're probably going to want a little more resolution to bend this around. There's a couple ways we can do this. I can select all of it and right click somewhere on it and say Subdivide, and you can see how it doubled both this direction in the vertical and the horizontal, how many subdivision cuts are in there. But that might be maybe more than we want, so I'm going to go back with Control Z, and I'm going to select any of these horizontal edges, and I'm going to hold down Control and R, and putting my cursor somewhere near that line. You see if I go to the side, it divides it that way. If I come here, it will divide it this way. Now it hasn't made a change yet. I need to click first. I'm going to click, and I'm going to actually hit Escape on the keyboard. So there's our line, our subdivision there. And now what that's going to let me do is if I go to my vertex select mode, you can see how those points now show up a little bit more. I can move these vertices around to hug this shape a little bit more closely. Especially on the ends, that's kind of what I was interested in, getting more resolution there. Now in areas where maybe you want to get closer, you can do that again. I'm going to go back to edge select mode, select this one or this one, this vertical area, and I'm going to hold down Control and press R on the keyboard, click and hit Escape. And if I go back to vertex select mode, now I can move these in without collapsing so much. Maybe down here too, I want some more information around that bottom piece. I'm going to zoom in. To switch quickly between the different select modes, I am using hotkeys. So I've been using 1, 2, and 3 on the keyboard to move between vertex select, edge select, and face select. So right now we're in vertex select. I can go to edge select, and then I can go to face select with 3. So back to vertex select, I'm going to press 1. You can see all 4 of these vertices are selected. I can select individuals. More hotkeys, not my favorites, but they are kind of a reality when you want to be moving between certain selection modes rapidly. Okay, let's say we feel pretty good about that. I'm going to hit Tab, and we can see there's our 3D object. If we rotate around, okay, we can see it sticking to the plane here, our background reference. I'm going to turn off that perspective mode because we're not going to want that ultimately. And we can go to shaded mode here. And we can see, yep, it's a plane with kind of a funny contour. But we want to make sure we have our atlas and all of our textures applied to this object. Right now, there's not a lot going on. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make a material that references this atlas. And we can go ahead and bring in our diffuse, our roughness, and our normal maps at the same time if we'd like. So I'm going to head over to the shading tab. Make sure my object is kind of in somewhere in the viewport where we can see. And I'm going to click New Material. Okay, I'm going to give this material a name. Cans Bones. I'm going to bring in my first image texture. Let's go ahead and add our alpha. So I'm going to hold down Shift A. Okay, just like we would do in the layout viewport when we're adding geometry, here in the node editor of the shader editor, we can add some nodes. This is how we're going to control what gets plugged into the shader to make our material. So I'm going to search for image texture. I'm going to hit enter. And before I click anything, it's going to kind of follow my cursor. So I'm going to click somewhere. I'm going to go ahead and take this color and plug it to alpha. Okay, it might seem like we'd want to plug alpha to alpha, but the way we set up our image, we're going to want to use color to alpha. Now we go navigate for that texture. And let's see, I keep getting put back atlases, and here's all of our beautiful textures. I'm going to go to alpha, and you can see that's a little strange. It got put up there. So let's go ahead and take care of that, and then we can come back and we can populate the rest of our material here. So my first thought, if we go to the UV editing workspace, is UVs. And by the way, if you don't see your texture alpha here, you might need to go up to this little image icon and navigate to it. You might have some other images stuck in here or none at all. Make sure you have the right texture alpha input here. Okay, I have a feeling our UVs are set in a kind of odd way. And here we are. If we look at what's happening with our UVs, since we started with a plane, I'm going to try to see if I can select some of these individual pieces here. So you can see this first part is UV unwrap. Because we started with that plane, it sort of comes with a UV unwrapping because it's such a simple object. Blender kind of has an idea of how to stuff that into a square texture. So we've got our square inside of a square. That's why that's showing up, believe it or not. But if we select the other regions of our mesh, just this plane here, not a lot going on. It's just emptiness. It's because it's not inside of the UV square. So let's select everything. Again, we are in edit mode. If you're not in edit mode, you're not going to get too far. So we're going to go to edit mode with tab. Make sure we select everything with A. And I'm going to go to UV, project from view. Okay, now you can see things are already changing. Let's select it again and come over here to the UV side where we see our Cans Bones alpha texture. I'm going to select everything here. You can also use the marquee. And I'm going to hit G on the keyboard and try to center this in and around our shape. Remember, the image shape is going to be used to cut away the kind of excess around our model. Now you might say, well, what the heck's going on? We brought in our alpha mask. We worked really hard in Photoshop to clean up the edges and all that, but we're still getting this black trim around the edges. So what we need to do with any new material you make, we need to come down here in the material properties and scroll down until we see settings. If you don't see settings opened up, go ahead and expand that. And we're going to change blend mode to alpha clip. And now you can see, if we get close to it, we can see, yes, it's cut out everything along that edge. Now we've UV unwrapped our mesh and aligned it to our texture map. Let's go ahead and go back into shader mode and start to plug in the rest of those pieces of the material. That'll hopefully keep us motivated to keep chugging along here. So back to the shader tab. Instead of creating new image nodes, I'm going to just duplicate this with Shift D. Okay, and zooming in, I'm going to close this one out and click open. Looks like I'm going to have to keep navigating to our textures, but that's okay. And now I'm going to drag, this is my diffuse, I'm going to drag color to base color. And it's already starting to really look like something. How about that? I'm going to duplicate this again. Navigate to our roughness. And the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate any of these. And navigate to our normal. Before we plug the normal into normal, we're going to hit Shift A, search for normal map. Click. We're going to plug color into color and normal into normal. Okay, if we get close to this, we can see if I play with this strength slider, you can see how that normal map is affecting our object with our material. So I'm going to keep that back at 1. A little bit of realism is going to help us when we start to assemble our foliage from these different pieces and the components. So let's go back to the layout tab. I'm going to turn on viewport shading. You can see we have our first component inside of our array in our texture atlas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw another kind of object, and I'm going to show you a new technique, and then we'll fast forward and do kind of a time lapse. In object mode, I'm going to hold down Shift A. Over here in mesh, I'm going to scroll down to single vert, add single vert. And now where did it go? It added it over here at the world origin 0, 0, 0. And in edit mode, if you have different modes selected like edge select or face select, you're not going to be able to actually move this. I'm going to turn the gizmo on to show you we actually don't have anything selected. So if I go to vertex selection, and now with the marquee I'm selecting over this, now we can move this single vertex around. Okay, I'm going to turn that gizmo back off because we have a very small object here. See, all it is just a single point. I can't zoom into it because it sort of is infinitely discrete, but let's go ahead and bring it over to our model. I'm in, again, edit mode, using G to move it on over. And just like we did with the planes, I'm going to use the extrude command to walk points around the outside of our shape here. So with E, add a point, add a point. Okay, you can decide how much resolution you want to give this. But we're shooting for low polygon count here, so not a lot. If you accidentally hit E on the keyboard and sort of forget and click away, what you're going to have is actually 2 points living in the same spot. So if I click once in there, I'll go back. I'm clicking once in here, I go back. I do have 2 points overlapping each other. Just be mindful of that. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as if I didn't notice, and we'll see kind of what happens later. Okay, we can come back and clean this up later if we're not totally happy with it. Okay, in these last 2 points, there's a few ways we can connect these. I'm going to select both of them, holding down Shift on the keyboard, clicking both, or you can marquee select them. And I'm going to hit F on the keyboard. We filled that distance between these 2 points with an edge. Okay, what we're going to try to do now is fill this entire shape with faces. Okay, right now all it is a bunch of lines and points. It's not actually faces yet. So I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to hit Alt F. Okay, and it created quite a mess. So what is going on here? We were expecting to fill in this shape all on the inside, but we're getting these strange artifacts. So I'm going to go back and see, again, Alt F. You can see kind of where some of these problems might be emerging. This point seems to be causing some issues. So if I come over here, I can see, yeah, I do have those 2 points overlapping. Come over here and see, do I have 2 points overlapping down here? Maybe not. So if it's hard to track down where the source of the problem is, we can select everything and press F3 and type in merge by distance. And as you can see, it already says removed 1 vertice. You can drag the slider left or right, play a bit more with how much distance your threshold is going to be for when you merge points. But all we really want to do is not really disturb the shape, but make sure we have, if there's any overlapping points, we're going to go ahead and merge those. So if they're sharing the exact same place, we really should have to have a very low threshold here to do that. So we removed 1 point, that's great. So now let's select everything, and with Alt F, we've filled that shape nice and quickly with a bunch of faces. Now you can see the topology here, the shape is a lot different than our stem, our bone object over here. This is kind of irregular. We've got a lot of triangles, whereas here we've got these quadrangles in our polygons. It's not necessarily good or bad, it's just different. What's going to be harder to do is that trick where we subdivided that with that hitting Control R. You're just not going to have that same flow that the other kind of shapes have. Now we can subdivide this if we select everything and right click subdivide. Okay, we can create more geometry in here, but we're going to try to limit that until we really need it. I'm going to split this video into 2 parts, with the second part including a time lapse showing the tracing of the rest of the foliage objects and including some more advanced techniques on creating these shapes.